ring floor. An instant of light, violet-white, flash bulb bright. 100 miles of atmosphere compressed in an instant to a star-hot cone of plasma slapped the liar hard across the nose. Lewis blinked, and they were down. He heard Tila's frustrated complaint, "Tange, we missed it all." And the puppeteer's answer, "To witness titanic events is always dangerous, usually painful, and often fatal. Be grateful for the slaver stasis field, if not for your undependable luck." Lewis heard these things and ignored them. He was horribly dizzy. His eyes tried to find a level. The sudden transition from terrible fall to stable ground would have been dizzying enough without the liar's attitude to make it worse. The liar was 35 degrees short of being exactly upside down. With her cabin gravity still working perfectly, she wore the landscape like a tilted hat. The sky was a high noon sky from Earth's temperate zone. The landscape was puzzling, shiny flat and translucent, with distant reddish-brown ridges. One would have to go outside to see it properly. Lewis released his crash web and stood up. His balance was precarious, for his eyes and his inner ear disagreed on the direction of down. He took it slowly, easy, no hurry. The emergency was over. He turned, and Tila was in the airlock. She was not wearing a pressure suit. The inner door was just closing. He bellowed, "Tila, you silly Lukoto, come out of there." Too late. She couldn't possibly have heard him through the closed hermetic seal. Lewis sprang to the lockers. The air samplers on the liar's wing had been vaporized with the rest of the liar's external sensors. He would have to go out in a pressure suit and use the chest sensors to find out if the Ringworld's air could be breathed safely. Unless Tila collapsed and died before he could get out, then he would know. The outer door was opening. Automatically, the internal gravity went off in the airlock. Tila Brown dropped headfirst through the open door, clutching frantically for a door jamb, had it for just long enough to change her angle of fall. She landed on her tail instead of her skull. Lewis climbed into his pressure suit, zipped up the chest, donned the helmet, and closed the clamps. Outside and overhead, Tila was on her feet, rubbing herself where she had landed. She hadn't stopped breathing, thank Finnegal for his forbearance. Lewis entered the lock. No point in checking his suit air. He'd only be in the suit long enough for the instruments to tell him if he could breathe the air outside. He remembered the tilt of the ship in time to grab at the jam as the airlock opened. As the cabin gravity went off, Lewis swung around, hung by his hands for an instant, and dropped. His feet shot out from under him the moment they touched ground. He landed hard on his gluteus maximi. The flat, grayish, translucent material beneath the ship was terribly slippery. Lewis tried once to stand, then gave it up. Sitting, he examined the dials on his chest. His helmet spoke to him in Speaker's burry voice. "Lewis." "Yeah." "Is the air breathable?" "Yeah, thin though, say a mile above sea level Earth standard." "Shall we come out?" "Sure, but bring a line into the lock and tie it to something, otherwise we'll never get back up. Watch out when you get down, the surface is almost frictionless." Tila was having no trouble with the slippery surface. She stood awkwardly, with her arms folded, waiting for Lewis to quit fooling around and take off his helmet. He did. "I have something to tell you," he said, and he spoke rudely to her. He spoke of the uncertainties in spectroanalysis of an atmosphere from 2 light-years away. He spoke of subtle poisons, metal compounds, and strange dusts, organic wastes and catalysts, which can poison an otherwise breathable atmosphere, and which can only be detected from an actual air sample. He spoke of criminal carelessness and culpable stupidity. He spoke of the unwisdom in volunteering one's services as a guinea pig. He said it all before the aliens could leave the airlock. Speaker came down hand over hand, landed on his feet, and moved a few steps away, cat careful, balanced like a dancer. Nessus came down, gripping the rope with alternate sets of teeth. He landed in tripod position. If either of them noticed that Tila was upset, they gave no sign. They stood below the tilted hull of the Lyre, looking about them. They were in an enormous, shallow gully. Its floor was translucent gray and perfectly flat and smooth, like a vast glass tabletop. Its borders, 100 yards from the ship in either direction, were gentle slopes of black lava. The lava seemed to ripple and flow before Lewis's eyes. It must be still hot, he decided, from the impact of the Lyre's landing. The shallow lava walls stretched away behind the ship, away and away, perfectly straight, until they dwindled to a vanishing point. Lewis tried to stand up. Of the four of them, he was the only one having trouble with his balance. He reached his feet, then stood precariously balanced, unable to move. Speaker to Animals unsheathed his flashlight laser and fired at a point near his feet. They watched the point of green light in silence. There was no crackle of solid material exploding into vapor. No steam or smoke formed where the beam struck. When Speaker released the trigger button, the light was gone instantly. The spot was not glowing, nor was it marked in any way. Speaker delivered the verdict. We are in a furrow plowed by our own landing. The ring foundation material must have ultimately stopped our fall. Nessus, what can you tell us about it?
This is something new, the puppeteer answered. It seems to retain no heat, yet it is not a variant on the general product's hull, nor on the slaver stasis field.
We'll need protection to climb the walls, said Lewis. He wasn't particularly interested in the ring foundation material. Not then. You'd better stay here, all of you, while I climb up. After all, he was the only one wearing a heat-insulated pressure suit.
I'll come along,
said Tila. Moving without effort, she came up under his arm. He leaned heavily on her, stumbling but not falling, as they moved toward the black lava slope. The lava was good footing, though steep. Thanks, he said, and he started up. A moment later, he realized that Tila was following him. He said nothing. The faster she learned to look before she leapt, the longer she'd live. They were a dozen yards up the slope when Tila yelled and began dancing. Kicking high, she turned and pelted down slope. She slid like an ice skater when she hit the ring floor. Sliding, gliding, she turned with her hands on her hips and glared upward, baffled and injured and angry. It could have been worse, Lewis told himself. She could have slipped and fallen and burned her bare hands, and he'd still have been right. He continued to climb, repressing ugly pangs of guilt. The bank of lava was approximately 40 feet high. At the top, it gave way to clean, white sand. They had landed in a desert. Searching the near distance with his eyes, Lewis could find no sign of vegetation green or water blue. That was a piece of luck. The Lyre could have easily plowed through a city, or several cities. The Lyre had plowed quite a furrow. It stretched long miles across the white sand. In the distance, beyond where the gouge ended, another began. The ship had bounced, not once, but many times. The gouge of the Liar's Landing went on, narrowing to no more than a dotted line, a trace. Lewis let his eyes follow the trace, and he found himself looking into infinity. The Ringworld had no horizon. There was no line where the land curved away from the sky. Rather, earth and sky seemed to merge in a region where details the size of continents would have been mere points, where all colors blended gradually into the blue of sky. The vanishing point held his eyes fixed. When he blinked, as he finally did, it was with deliberate effort. Like the void mist of Mount Look at That, seen decades ago and light centuries away. Like the undistorted deeps of space, as seen by a belt miner in a single ship. The Ringworld's horizon could grip the eye and the mind of a man before he was aware of the danger. Lewis turned to face into the gully. He shouted, "The world is flat." They looked up at him. "We ripped quite a line coming down. I can't see that there's anything living around here, so we were lucky. Where we hit, the earth splashed. I can see a scattering of small craters, secondary meteorites back along the way we came." He turned in the other direction, and he stopped. "Lewis." "That is the biggest Dange mountain I ever saw in my life." "Lewis." He had spoken too softly. "A mountain," he bellowed. "Wait till you see it. The Ringworld engineers must have wanted to put one big mountain in the world, one mountain too big to use, too big to grow coffee on, or trees, too big even for skiing. It's magnificent." It was magnificent. One mountain, roughly conical, all alone, forming no part of a chain. It had the look of a volcano, a mock volcano, for beneath the Ringworld there was no magma to form volcanoes. Its base was lost in the mist. Its higher slopes showed clear through what must be thinning air, and its peak had a shiny look of snow. Dirty snow, not bright enough to be clean snow, perhaps permafrost. There was a crystal clarity to the edges of the peak. Could it thrust clear out of the atmosphere? A real mountain that size would collapse of its own weight, but this mountain would be a mere shell of ring foundation material. "I'm going to like the Ringworld engineers," said Louis Wu to himself. On a world built to ordered specification, there was no logical reason for such a mountain to exist. Yet every world should have at least one unclimbable mountain. Beneath the curve of the hull, they waited for him. Their questions boiled down to one. "Did you see any signs of civilization?" "No." They made him describe everything he'd seen. They established directions. Spinward was back along the meteoric furrow dug by the Liar's Landing. Anti-spinward was the opposite direction toward the mountain. Port and starboard were to the left and right of a man facing spinward. "Could you see any of the rim walls or port? To port or starboard?" "No, I don't understand why. They should have been there." "Unfortunate," said Nessus. "Impossible. You can see for thousands of miles up there." "Not impossible. Unfortunate." Again. "Could you see nothing beyond the desert?" "No. A long way to port I saw a trace of blue. Might have been ocean. Might have been just distance." "No buildings." "Nothing." "Contrails in the sky. Straight lines that might have been freeways." "Nothing." "Did you see any sign of civilization?" "If I had, I'd tell you. For all I know, the whole 10 trillion of them moved to a real Dyson sphere last month."
Lewis, we must find civilization.
I know that. It was too obvious. They had to get off the Ringworld, and they weren't going to move the Lyre by themselves. True barbarians would not be help enough, no matter how numerous or friendly. There is one bright aspect to all of this, said Louis Wu. We don't have to repair the ship. If we can just get the Lyre off the ring's rotation will fling it, and us, out of the star's gravity well, out to where we can use the hyperdrive.
But first we must find help.
Or force help, said Speaker.
But why do you all just stand here talking?
Tila burst out. She had been waiting silent in the circle, letting the others thrash it out.
We've got to get out of here, don't we? Why not get the fly cycles out of the ship? Let's get moving, then talk. I am reluctant to leave the ship,
the puppeteer stated.
Reluctant? Are you expecting help? Is anyone the least bit interested in us? Did anyone answer our radio calls? Lewis says we're in the middle of a desert. How long are we going to sit here?
She could not realize that Nessus had to work up his courage, and, thought Lewis, she had no patience at all.
Of course we will leave, said the puppeteer. I merely stated my reluctance. But we must decide where we will go, else we will not know what to take and what to leave behind. We head for the nearest rim wall.
She's right, said Lewis. If there's civilization anywhere, it'll be at the rim wall. But we don't know where it is. I should have been able to see it from up there.
No,
said the puppeteer. You weren't there, Tangent. You could see forever up there, thousands of miles without a break. Wait a minute.
The Ringworld is nearly 1,000,000 UN miles across.
I was just about to realize that, said Louis Wu. Scale. It keeps fouling me up. I just can't visualize anything this big.
It will come to you,
the puppeteer reassured him. I wonder. Maybe my brain isn't big enough to hold it. I keep remembering how narrow the ring looked from deep space, like a thread of blue ribbon. Blue ribbon, Lewis repeated, and shivered. If each rim wall were 1,000 miles high, then how far away would it need to be before Louis Wu couldn't see it at all? Assume that Louis Wu can see through 1,000 miles of dust-laden, water-vapor-laden, somewhat terrestrial air. If such air gave way to effective vacuum at 40 miles, then the nearest rim wall must be at least 25,000 miles away. If you flew that far on Earth, you would have returned to your starting point, but the nearest rim wall might be much further than that. We cannot drag the Lyre behind our sky cycles, the speaker was saying. Were we attacked, we would have to cut the ship loose. Better to leave it here, near a prominent landmark. Who said anything about dragging the ship? A good warrior thinks of everything. We may end by dragging the ship in any case if we cannot find help at the rim.
We will find help, said Nessus.
He's probably right, said Lewis. The spaceports are at the rim. If the whole ring went back to the Stone Age and civilization started to spread again, it would start with returning ram ships. It would have to. You speculate wildly, said Speaker. Maybe. But I agree with you. I might add that if the ring has lost all of its great secrets, we might still find machinery at the spaceport. Working machinery. Machinery which can be repaired. But which rim was closer? Tila's right, Lewis said suddenly. Let's get to work. At night we'll be able to see further. Hours of hard labor followed. They moved machinery, sorted it out, lowered heavy items by wire from the ship's airlock. The sudden shifts of gravity posed problems, but none of the equipment was particularly fragile. Sometime during those hours, Lewis caught Tila in the ship while the aliens were outside. "You've been looking like someone poisoned your favorite orchid thing. Care to talk about it?" She shook her head, avoiding his eyes. Her lips, he saw, were perfect for pouting. She was one of those rare, lucky women whom crying does not make ugly. "Then I'll talk. When you went out the lock without a pressure suit, I dressed you down good. 15 minutes later, you tried to climb a slope of congealing lava, wearing nothing but ship slippers."
"You wanted me to burn my feet."
"That's right. Don't look so surprised. We need you. We don't want you killed. I want you to learn to be careful. You never learned before, so you'll have to learn now. You'll remember your sore feet longer than you'll remember my lectures."
"Need me? That's a laugh. You know why Nessus brought me here? I'm a good luck charm that failed."
"I'll grant you blew that one. As a good luck charm, you're fired. Come on, smile. We need you. We need you to keep me happy so I don't rape Nessus. We need you to do all the heavy work while we lie about in the sun. We need you to make intelligent decisions." She forced a smile. It broke apart and she was crying. She buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed against him, racking, her fingernails digging hard into his back. It was not exactly the first time a woman had cried on Lewis Wu, but Tila probably had more reason than most. Lewis held her, rubbing his fingers along the muscles of her back in a half-automatic attempt at a massage, and waited it out. She talked into the material of his pressure suit.
"How was I to know the rock would burn me?"
"Remember the Finnical laws. The perversity of the universe tends towards a maximum. The universe is hostile."
"But it hurt."
"The rock turned on you. It attacked you. Listen," he pleaded, "you've got to learn to think paranoid. Think like Nessus."
"I can't. I don't know how he thinks. I don't understand him at all."
She raised her tear-stained face.
"I don't understand you."
"Yeah." He ran his thumbs hard along the edges of her shoulder blades, then down her vertebrae. "Listen," he said presently. "Suppose I said the universe is my enemy. Would you think I was nuts?" She nodded vigorously, angrily. "The universe is against me," said Lewis Wu. "The universe hates me. The universe makes no provision for a 200-year-old man. What is it that shapes a species? Evolution, isn't it? Evolution gives Speaker his night vision and his balance. Evolution gives Nessus the reflex that turns his back on danger. Evolution turns a man's sex off at 50 or 60. Then evolution quits. Because evolution is through with any organism once that organism is too old to breed. You follow me?"
"Sure, you're too old to breed,"
she mocked him bitterly. "Right. A few centuries ago, some biological engineers carved up the genes of a ragweed and produced booster spice. As a direct result, I am 200 years old and still healthy, but not because the universe loves me. The universe hates me," said Lewis Wu. "It tried to kill me many times. I wish I could show you the scars. It'll keep trying, too."
"Because you're too old to breed."
"Finnical in hysterics, woman. You're the one who doesn't know how to take care of herself. We are in unknown territory. We don't know the rules, and we don't know what we might meet. If you try to walk on hot lava, you could get more than sore feet next time. Stay alert. You understand me?"
"No,"
said Tila.
"No."
Later, after she had washed her face, they carried the fourth fly cycle into the airlock. For half an hour the aliens had left them alone. Had they decided to avoid two humans dealing with strictly human problems? Maybe. Maybe. Between high walls of black lava stretched an infinite strip of ring foundation material, as flat as a polished tabletop. In the foreground, a tremendous glass cathode tube lay on its side. Beneath the curving flank of the transparent cylinder, a cluster of machinery and 4 odd figures looking slightly lost. How about water? Lewis was asking. I couldn't see any lakes. Do we have to haul our own water?
No.
Nessus opened the aft section of his fly cycle to show them the water tank and the cooler extractor which would condense water from the air. The fly cycles were miracles of compact design. Aside from their highly individualistic saddles, they were built all alike. A pair of 4-foot spheres joined by the constriction that held the saddle. Half the rear section was luggage space, and there was harness for stringing additional gear. 4 flat feet, extended now for landing, would recess against the 2 spheres during flight. The puppeteer's fly cycle had a reclining saddle, a belly bed with 3 grooves for his 3 legs. Nessus would lie immobile on his belly, controlling the vehicle with his mouths. The cycles intended for Lewis and Tila held padded contour chairs with neck rests and power controls for attitude. Like Nessus's and Speaker's, these saddles rested in the constriction in the cycle's dumbbell shape and were split to accommodate leg supports. Speaker's saddle was much larger and broader and without a neck rest. There was rigging for tools on both sides of his saddle, for weapons. We must carry anything that could conceivably be used as a weapon, Speaker was saying, as he prowled restlessly amongst the scattered machinery.
We brought no weapons,
Lewis answered. Nessus answered.
Because we wished to show ourselves as peaceful, we brought no weapons at all.
Then what are these? Speaker had already assembled a somewhat sparse collection of lightweight artifacts.
All tools,
said Nessus. He pointed.
These are flashlight lasers with variable beams. At night, one can see great distances with these, for one can narrow the beam indefinitely by turning this ring. Indeed, one must be careful not to burn holes in nearby objects or persons, for the beam can be made perfectly parallel and extremely intense. These dueling pistols are for settling arguments between ourselves. They fire a 10-second charge. One must be careful not to touch this safety button, because
then it fires an hour's charge. That's a Jinxian model, isn't it?
Yes. And this item is a modified digging tool. Perhaps you know of the digging tool found in a slaver stasis box.
He meant the slaver disintegrator, Lewis decided. The disintegrator was indeed a digging tool. Where its narrow beam fell, the charge on the electron was temporarily suppressed. Solid matter, rendered suddenly and violently positive, tended to tear itself into a fog of monatomic dust. It is worthless as a weapon, the Kazin rumbled. We have studied it. It works too slowly to be used against an enemy.
Exactly. A harmless toy. This item.
The item held in the puppeteer's mouth looked like a double-barreled shotgun, except that the handle had a characteristic puppeteer-built look, like quicksilver caught in the act of flowing from one shape to another.
This item is exactly like the slaver disintegrator digging tool, except that one beam suppresses the positive charge on the proton. One should be careful not to use both beams at once, as the beams are parallel and separate.
I understand, said the Kazin. If the twin beams were allowed to fall next to each other, there would be a current flow.
Exactly.
Do you believe these makeshifts will be adequate? There is no guessing what we shall meet. That's not quite true, said Louis Wu. This isn't a planet, after all. If there was an animal the Ringworlders didn't like, chances are they left it alone. We won't meet any tigers or mosquitoes.
Suppose the Ringworlders liked tigers,
Tila wondered. It was a valid point, despite its facetious sound. What did they know of Ringworld physiology? Only that they came from a water world using approximately G2 starlight. On that basis, they might look like humans, puppeteers, Kzinti, grogs, dolphins, killer whales, or sperm whales. But they probably wouldn't. We will fear the Ringworlders more than their pets, Speaker predicted. We must take all possible weapons. I recommend that I be placed in charge of this expedition until such time as we may leave the ring.
I have the task.
I have not forgotten that, Nessus. You may think of the task as an absolute veto power. I suggest that you show reluctance to use it. Think, all of you. The Kzin loomed over them, 500 pounds of teeth and claws and orange fur. We are all supposed to be sentient. Think of our situation. We have been attacked. Our ship is half destroyed. We must travel an unknown distance across unknown territory. The powers of the Ringworlders were once enormous. Are they still enormous, or do they now use nothing more complex than a spear made from a sharpened bone? They might equally well have transmutation, total conversion beams, anything that may have been required to build this. The Kzin looked around him, at the glassy floor and the black lava walls, and perhaps he shuddered. This incredible artifact.
I have the task, said Nessus. The expedition is mine.
Are you pleased with its success? I mean no insult. I intend no challenge. You must place me in command. Of the four of us, I alone have training in war.
Let's wait, Tila suggested. We may not find anything to fight.
Agreed, said Lewis. He didn't fancy being led by a Kzin. Very well, but we must take the weapons. They began to load the fly cycles. There was other equipment besides weaponry. Camping equipment, food testing and food rebuilding kits, vials of dietary additives, lightweight air filters. There were communicator discs designed to be worn on a human or Kzinti wrist or a puppeteer neck. They were bulky and not particularly comfortable. Why these? Lewis asked, for the puppeteer had already shown that the intercom system built into the flight cycles.
They were originally intended to communicate with the Liar's autopilot so that we might summon the ship when necessary.
Then why do we need them now?
As translators, Lewis, should we run into sentient beings, as seems likely, we will need the autopilot to translate for us.
Oh. They were finished. Equipment still rested beneath the Liar's hull, but it was useless stuff. Free-fall equipment for deep space, the pressure suits, some replacement parts for machinery vaporized by the Ringworld defense system. They had loaded even the air filters, more because they were no more bulky than handkerchiefs than because they were likely to be needed. Lewis was bone-tired. He mounted his fly cycle and looked about him, wondering if he had forgotten anything. He saw Tila staring straight upward, and even through the mist of exhaustion, he saw that she was horrified.
There ain't no justice, she swore. It's still noon.
Don't panic.
Lewis, we've been working for a good 6 hours. I know we have. How could it still be noon?
Don't worry about it. The sun doesn't set, remember?
Doesn't set?
Her hysteria ended as suddenly as it had begun.
Oh, of course it doesn't set.
We'll have to get used to it. Look again. Isn't that the edge of a shadow square against the sun? Something had certainly nipped a cord out of the sun's disk. The sun diminished as they watched. "We had best take flight," said Speaker. "When darkness falls, we should be aloft."